Okay. Ooh, a bunch of people on here. Cool. So we are here today with 3 of the Pollen crew. Super psyched to be here. Super psyched to talk Pollen. Can you guys give me a quick intro, Sri, from you?
Yeah.
To Oscar to Anthony, and just who you are, what do you do?
Sounds good. Sridatta Kampella. I've been working on Pollen for the last 8 months, and I've been doing rewards and data science.
Okay. Geeky stuff.
For sure.
Yeah.
My name is Oscar Agueda. I've been doing the networking side of Pollen.
Is in networking, and so that,
I
what does
cover
that entail?
Core, radios, antennas, bumblebees, anything.
Okay, kind of the radio stuff.
Yeah.
All right, network stuff, and then who might you be, sir?
I'm Anthony Lewandowski. I'm the CEO. So I do all the sweeping that needs to happen.
All the janitorial
All
work.
the janitorial work, everything.
Okay, cool. Lee, you got any comments? Nothing yet. Everyone's just saying hello. Super good to see everyone here. Always good to share information. So one of the reasons I wanted to come up here was that we've got Pollen coming up with the CBRS stuff, and there's a bunch of really cool stuff, and there's also a bunch of challenges. So let's start out with kind of what Pollen is and what maybe where you came from, where it started with this Pronto stuff, and then how it came into Pollen.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll take that question. So Pollen came about us needing connectivity. We were building these self-driving trucks, and we were deploying them in regions where there's no cell phone connection, no Wi-Fi. So we tried a bunch of different techniques. We tried Wi-Fi, we tried mesh networking. Didn't work, and so we built our own LTE network, and that worked like a charm. And so, like, that was pretty cool. There's a reason why cell phone companies or phone companies use LTE and not, you don't have a Wi-Fi mesh everywhere.
Yep.
And then I was home, and I didn't have service really in my house, and I was like, if we can make it work, far away, Alaska, Nevada, back corners, why does it not work in the Bay Area? You would expect that there would be really good coverage here. So we're like, okay, let's roll it out and deploy here as well. So we set up a tower, worked awesome, full service and everything. We're like, hey, this is something we should figure out how to spread this and make it work externally. And then we're thinking, if we're doing connectivity, you might as well build a network the way you'd want to build a network. Not incrementing from 1900s, but starting fresh from everything we know in 2022. So that's why we decided to make it privacy first and anonymous and encrypted, decentralized, all these things to try to make it work in today's world.
And that's where we are. Okay, so if I'm getting that right, it starts with this. The company Pronto is doing a bunch of stuff in the autonomous vehicle world?
Yep. Right.
And so that's like self-driving trucks, vehicles, whatever. Sometimes off-road, mostly mining. I'm getting that right?
Yeah, there's on-road as well, but on-road is more of an assist, where they go kind of unoccupied, meaning they just drive where there's nobody in them, is on private property, and off-road, which is mines, yeah.
Okay, cool. And then from there, you're like, okay, the Wi-Fi doesn't work. We all know, not we all know, but Wi-Fi doesn't go more than a couple hundred feet. LoRa is obviously not the right thing for it. The mesh thing isn't for it because you can't, I guess, bounce it through enough different stations. There's some
Well, it just really
disasters.
gets slow, right? So the more base stations you put up, you have to do the handoffs from one to the other, was really tricky. The range that you get out of the routers is not what you would expect. The more users you have, the more jamming they kind of do to each other, as opposed to properly coordinating and say, okay, I'm talking now, then you talk, and then he talks, and everybody's talking at the same time, and which causes a pure chaos. And so we think that was the right way to do it. Yeah.
Totally, and that leads you to CBRS. Right, more or less.
So the way to run that, so CBRS is the frequency that you're, or it's the band of frequencies that you're allowed to use without a license, which is a great thing that FCC did, and kind of stimulate and allow this for happening. Otherwise, you can spend billions of dollars to get dedicated spectrum, which is kind of how the old way was created. So we think this is a great step forward, and we hope that the CBRS program expands to other bands and to higher powers. So.
Fingers crossed there. So that's like the first big challenge with CBRS is Citizens Broadband Radio Service. I'm getting that right. I think it is.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and it is this swath of spectrum from 3.55 gigs to 3.7 gigs. So far, so good. You guys are like, yeah,
you're good.
You
keep going.
Yeah. And in that band, the first big challenge is we've got 3 sets of users. We've got us deploying Pollen radios, basically at the bottom of the priority list. Above us, we've got the priority access licenses, so people who have paid. And they paid a lot of money for that. I think the auction was $4.5 billion. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm going to pay 10 grand for my city. It was a chunk of money.
I think
and
it's
then
by
above,
zip code, right? So it's not like you can break them down. Some people got certain areas and
Yep.
so forth. Yeah. Mhm.
But there's a lot of money spent on that. And then above that in priority is the US government, mostly for us here on the West Coast, the Navy running their radar. Okay, so if all of those users are using it at the same time, as soon as the Navy fires up, it basically shuts our ability down if they're on the same tiny slice of spectrum inside that slice of spectrum that we're on. So that's kind of challenge number one, is that we don't have, and this applies to all of these CBRS projects, not just you.
Correct.
How are you guys kind of thinking about that as far as providing reliable service over time?
Yeah, so the Navy doesn't necessarily use their spectrum. They just have a ship in the area that says we'd like to use it, or they just broadcast their presence. And there's a 150-mile range or so that gets turned off or turned down.
Yep.
There's efforts for turning down not all the channels at the same time. They
Yep.
typically use some more than others. And so there's efforts to make it where they don't just turn everybody off. So that's not there yet, but that's one of the areas that you're going to. Priority license users have the same concern, and the GAA or general access folks like us kind of get the remnant. So of the 15 channels in that 150 megahertz spectrum, they're 10 megahertz each. 7 have PALs and 8 do not. And so
Okay.
it's not like in an area you can have
Not that all of them have it. Okay.
correct. So it's less than 50% at most they can do that. Now there's still everybody else has to compete for those frequencies. Our view on that is that we want to partner with the spectrum holders, and now that we have a product that's out there and a network that's out there, we can have them lease us in different windows of time the spectrum, and then we can provide a use case for monetizing that. And so right now it doesn't do much good if you got the license and you're not doing anything with it.
Yep.
And so we want to build the product to enable them to do that. And it really, if you think about Pollen, we don't see ourselves as a CBRS spectrum. We see ourselves as a kind of a bridge between physical bandwidth that exists in the ground, like a fiber cable,
Yep.
and a mobile user on their phone. And there's a way to connect them. Could be Wi-Fi, could be LTE, could be 5G. Doesn't have to be CBRS. In other places we have deployments on other frequencies.
Yep. Rad. I'm going to take a pause. Lee, anything coming in on the chat? To my left here off camera is my bride, Lee, running this thing.
Just Pollen mobile for Europe, but I don't know if we're into that yet. So
It's not there yet, but we are looking at it and talking to a couple European folks about getting that. But we've got a lot of interest, so we'd love to get there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about, I think, the physical deployment of it, which is putting up the radios and making sure you're plugging in the right Ethernet cable and getting your colors in the right order. For those of us who are newer to cable building, is walk me through what it looks like for a person either putting something, I think I'm asking the right question,
Correct.
something in their house versus something on their building, versus maybe partnering with a professional installer and doing something bigger. What does that look like?
I think if you want to deploy at your house, basically have different sets of radio we sell. Like entry point radio would be like a Camellia or a Dandelion, which is like outdoors, very small and simple to install. And then we go all the way up to a Buttercup, which is like a more professional install. You have to actually have a CPI, check it out. You have to go climb into the roof, like manually build it out for yourself. So then with the Camellia, it's pretty simple. It's like you just need internet access at your home with like your router, and just plug it in. Hopefully it'll just start transmitting immediately, right?
Yep.
But there's
and
always,
that's what you guys are known for, is that it works like right off the bat.
yeah, so you want to make it
So
always
far.
plug and play,
Yep.
regardless of what price point you buy into.
Yep.
But obviously we have some issues here and there that we're trying to iron out. And I think most of the friction comes with like showing the status of the radios and communicating that effectively to the consumers.
Yeah.
And then that's what we're working on. We're trying to work on like dashboards and information so you can like know when you're online, because the whole point is just plug and play and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Same with like the high-end units. It's just a more difficult physical install, but it's the same ethos. It's like just plug it and you're ready to go. But then one of the portions you have to consider is SaaS, right? So you have to register your antenna with SaaS, and there's the information. So we want to abstract that headache from you,
Yeah.
so you can just worry about sending photos and some measurements, and you're ready to go.
Okay, two things there. CPI is certified professional
Professional
installer,
installer, yeah.
and you need that on any deployment that is, what is it, 6 meters or 5 meters or more above
I think 6
average
meters.
terrain?
So I'm not the expert on this, but the CPI is the person that validates your install.
Yep.
So it has the word installer on it, but it's not the person that's actually physically
That's doing
mounting the equipment. It's the person that's taking the measurements that were taken from the installation
Yep.
and then communicating that through the SaaS service to the government to basically get your channel and band allocated there.
I like it. So I can be the installer.
You can be the installer.
And then I hire a CPI, or I can get my CPI for
Correct.
$500
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
and sign everything off myself and say, basically what the CPI, the end result is saying, hey, here's a directional radio. It's pointing in this direction and it's at this angle. So this should be the area that it covers
That height.
and the right height, right? And I think, I put one of these things up and it's directly facing a Navy shipyard. So I'm pretty sure it's going to get turned off a bunch, but I was curious to see what would happen. Then I put others up in around my house that are pointing in different directions. So there's the CPI stuff, and then SAS was the second thing that you
So
said.
SAS is basically the frequency management. So the CPI has to validate that your install is, correct and pointing in the right direction and have the right measurements. So then the SAS gets the information from the CPI installer and tries to basically manage your spectrum, saying like, hey, the Navy's coming into your backyard, it's time to stand down.
Yep.
And then basically it also gives you tools to best pick the frequency you should transmit and how much noise there is around your area.
Yep.
So that takes care of that for you.
Yep. And that goes back to your original point about Wi-Fi being, and this has been made many times before, like being in a room where everybody's shouting, you're kind of listening to hear a shout. And this SAS basically plan is saying
It's a little bit different than that. So think of
Okay,
it's the right concept generally, but it's a little bit different. So the SAS is allocating certain bands to certain radios, but you can have multiple people connecting to that radio. And,
Got it.
and all those phones and laptops and so forth are coordinated in the way they talk to the radio. Versus in a Wi-Fi standpoint, everybody's changing frequencies and talking at the same time. So you could see, like if you're in a city, there could be 60 Wi-Fi networks and your bandwidth throughput sucks because everybody else is using the same frequencies.
Yep.
Versus if you had them coordinated, then they're all sharing the full bandwidth spectrum that's available to them, and then you're getting a slice that's dedicated so you actually get some bits through. And then I'll talk, and then Shree will talk, and then we can effectively all share the bandwidth as opposed to otherwise we're just jamming ourselves and then lowering it. So it's a little bit, it's a similar concept, but it's
It starts
a
getting
different
geeky
level of
super
the
fast,
yeah.
Yeah.
I love to geek out on the technology bits, so that's the
Yeah, no, it's been interesting for me just to try and keep up and drink from the fire hose. But that brings us a little bit to the data side. So I got a Bumblebee. Funnily enough, a guy on Twitter, I think his name is like DY Pulse, shout out to him, was just like, hey, I saw what you did in helium. I think you'd like pollen. Can I send you a dandelion? I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I'll check this thing out. So he sends me a dandelion, sends me a Bumblebee. I set the thing up in my house and just like everyone else, start driving around to see what's going on. And it's pretty cool because you see the Bumblebee, all the little lights light up and then it starts blinking. You're like, oh, it's working. And I didn't need to do anything other than plug and play. So the plug and play thing is working. But the other piece I see is like, how do I know it's working right where I am? And what I started to see was that 24-hour, like there's a 24-hour delay, up to a 24-hour delay on some of the information. And I'm also seeing that some of the information isn't just lining up with what I'm seeing driving around in my car. So there's a bunch of different things that you're gonna have to sort through. So kind of walk me through how you're thinking about all that stuff and then I'll hammer on.
Yeah, for sure. So we do operate on a 24-hour cycle. We are working on making our product more real time and giving you feedback real time. But at the moment, it's all based on the 24-hour cycle.
We'll talk about why.
We think that it provides opportunity to kind of collect your information and transmit it, right? So we initially thought of it as a more like maybe it happens every hour or maybe it happens continuously. But what we found was there's locations where you get coverage and then there's locations where you don't get coverage. But you're reporting all of that information to us to form a comprehensive picture of the network. And then after the fact, we take the entire day's worth of activity, analyze it across the entire network, and then dish out the rewards for your portion of the activity for that entire day. And so the real-time portion of it, you can see maybe like where you are and like the types of validations you're getting, but you wouldn't be able to accurately predict how many rewards or how much rewards you get for that day until network activity is kind of finished for that day. We are thinking of ways to like optimize that or make it more predictable, but I think at the moment that's kind of what we're stuck on, right? So that also gives the opportunity for Bumblebees to come back to base and kind of recharge, right? And we think of that
a requirement.
which is a requirement, right? And I think that's really important also because we want to give people the opportunity to go out, do their activities, come back, and then get rewarded for that activity, right? So like part of it is we started this pollen drop concept where you can go out and go to places without coverage, drop this pollen, and then report back and say, hey, this is areas where we didn't have pollen, but we would like to see it.
Yep.
And I think that part of it is also crucial to the growth of the network. And to enable that, you have to come back to the base station and kind of report back what you saw, right?
That you saw that. So there's a couple concepts in there that I'm pretty sure I understand, but for someone watching this and like, oh, what's pollen? Is that you're providing, all of us are providing coverage, and then that coverage is getting validated with these units that you guys call bumblebees, it might be called mappers, same kind of thing. And those mappers are driving around. They each have their own, basically SIM card. So it's basically like a cell phone saying, hey, I hear that signal here.
It's
Right.
basically it's the Verizon "Can you hear me now" guy.
Yep. Everywhere.
Linux mini computer with the cell phone modem cruising around, validating the coverage that way. Yeah.
Yep. And then, let's see, the part where you have to come back to home base, I'm curious about that. Like, why can't the cell phone part of that SIM card just connect directly to the internet and be like, yeah, this guy was here?
So right now, your Bumblebee can only connect to Pollen network, right? So if you are connected on the Pollen network, you do
right.
send your logs automatically.
Yep.
The only use cases where you don't do that is if you're like out and about in a remote area and then come back. So that's the only time where like getting back to the base station is critical, because then all the pollination or all the drops that you did where you're incentivizing regions that don't have coverage, those don't happen, and then you won't get rewarded for that part.
But this has to be your base station. It's just any
base station,
any
correct.
pollen flower.
Correct.
Will provide it. Provides connectivity. You'll upload through it.
And also at the beginning of pollen, like the I guess coverage was spotty, so the connections to the flowers were fleeting, so it wasn't enough time for the logs to go through if you were swinging between flowers for a short amount of time. So we want to give that chance, like Strata said, to upload those logs at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's like
The
a
coverage
couple
is still
minutes.
spotty.
It's
But
spotty,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like as it gets more dense,
Sure.
then it gets more real time.
Yeah, we recommend anywhere from like 2 to 5 minutes based on like you sitting there, and like sometimes if you have a clear connection and you leave that connection up, it could be a matter of seconds. But sometimes you're like waiting for the connection to happen. So
You're getting rewarded for it. So it's
Yeah.
worth like cruising into home here on the Pacific on the West Coast at like 4:50 p.m. and just sitting in your driveway and kind of letting that thing fire for 10 minutes and make sure it's good to go. Okay, so there's differences between what you guys are doing and obviously what Helium is doing. One of the things that you guys are doing is kind of cool is that you're keeping, as far as I can tell, governance pretty internal right now. It's not yet where you're like, hey, anyone can vote on anything yet. And that seems to be to allow you guys to move a lot faster for right now. But there's aspects of that with this privacy and transparency where eventually you're going to run into this thing. Right now you guys are benevolent actors, but at some point someone's going to come along and be like, I want to see what you guys are doing. Walk me through let's say the next year of evolution of Pollen and how you guys see yourself navigating that.
Yeah, so there's 3 phases kind of to our build outs to where we become a real usable product and you know, decentralized. Phase 1 is the one that we're in right now, which is building out the network, making sure technology works, listening to community, to the feedback, and then implementing changes quickly instead of having a whole process for doing that, because we wanted the network to work. Phase 2, which we're nearing, is turning on the data credits, where currently all the data traffic that you're putting in is free to use, and the hosts are not being rewarded. But ultimately, the reason why this works is because we're making a real network that millions of people in the U.S. use every day, and pay for. And so that's really what we're trying to build. And then the third part after that, it will be kind of the transition to the full DAO. We call it an enhanced DAO, where the DAO will vote to appoint members to make decisions, because we still think that the decision making, by vote and be like, hey, everybody, let's change the word, on this page and have everybody vote on that change, isn't the right way to go. We think you should kind of elect, experts for a period of time and then have them, do their job, and they can tell you what they're going to do and they're going to be compensated for it. And so that way there's a way for the community to be like, hey, we love this person, and they don't work at Pollen OpCo, they work for Comcast or Verizon or Starbucks, so whatever name your company that would do that. and they could then help make all these decisions on behalf of the community, and then they can get voted out, and there's a way to transition out. But that way that you're still keeping the quick dynamism on decision making, because I think that's a critical aspect. It's a new field, it's a new
Big
technology. It's like, so we want to be very nimble and be able to adapt quickly, and we think that's been helpful to date.
Yeah, because the problem that I'm seeing with all of these blockchain and meat space projects, whether it's Helium or Pollen or Demo or Mathmetrics or whatever, or the long list of them, is that they get geeks that are super excited about technology, and they get a little bit of kind of crypto in there, and they're like, oh, we'll just stuff some blockchain shit in there and see what happens. And then they are missing, in general, like a really deeply well thought out economic incentive plan. And so those incentives can get perverted pretty quickly. Like it spins out of control fast. And then there's, of course, what I'm doing, like the marketing side. So like there's like 4 big pieces of all these projects, and it seems like on all of them, geek factor's high. Like there's nothing that I find on any of them that's like, oh, you're getting this part wrong. But what I'm seeing on the incentive side is like, and it's not because people are stupid by a long shot. Like these are some of the smartest people I ever met. This is a really tricky thing to get right. So going into
finance geeks, he's back here. Maybe he'll come on camera a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
And jump in. Yeah, come say hi. Come say hi.
We'll get him in here. So that brings us to the first kind of core value at Pollen that I read on the site was privacy, if I'm getting that right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, freedom is the first core
freedom
value.
is number one. Yeah. Freedom and privacy and anonymity.
Yes.
Yeah. So that kind of creates what I'm seeing problems in these blockchain and meat space arenas. This is Christian, who's going to stay quiet.
Say hello.
Yeah, right now, and maybe we'll pick up some sound from you. But it creates an environment where I can see, from my perspective, and I'd love to hear where I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, actually, where it makes it really easy for gamers or cheaters or thieves or whatever you want to be, graft, whatever you want to call it, to come in, because they don't have to be identified, right? They can be private, they can be anonymous, they can have the freedom to do all these different things, and so it makes it so that it seems to me that the system is weaker because of that. I would like to hear how I'm wrong there.
I think I'll repurpose a phrase that's being said a lot. This is obviously a much watered down version of that. Freedom isn't free, and so by having that value, there's a very different sensitive term for that, but we have other challenges that we're picking up, right? We could have everybody be registered, have their social security number, have their credit card number, and know who the actors are. Then like the cheating would be much lower, I would expect.
Or it'd be different, right?
It would be different. But at that point, what kind of environment, what kind of world, what kind of technology and network do we want to build?
Yep.
We want to build one where you can't just like block a person from accessing your network because you didn't like them. Ethnic group, name, friends, whatever you want to call it. And we want to make it where it's decentralized so that it can be like the internet. You can build it out yourself and extend it and go from there. And there's no central managing entity. And with that, because there's incentives for rolling out the network, obviously some people are going to want to get the incentives and not actually roll out the network. But that's where we spend a lot of time in technology, and I'm sure you could talk more about this, but for minimizing the cheating. There's always going to be some cheating that's happening, and we want to make it where it's in the noise and it doesn't really matter. I mean, we're still going to chase it, and we don't want it to happen, but we want to have all the values of the benefits that come from having a system that makes it technically possible or easier to cheat than not, because I think that's the way to make this more successful and grow, right? Because we're starting in the US now, but we already had, first question was like Pollen Europe, there's a huge demand of this all over around the world, and so we see Pollen growing. First in the US, we see this as a test case to show, does the concept work? Do people want it? Is it useful? And like, can we make it financially viable where the people paying for the data are getting the right amount of value compared to the corporate services that are out there? Once we can do that, we then want to replicate it everywhere around the world and have people be able to build out their network there. But you want to know more about the cheating?
Yeah.
I will say like our community as a whole is very sensitive to the idea of cheating, and so I think part of like their stewardship of a good network is like them being involved in catching cheaters and being involved in like the decision making to maybe ban an actor who's acting badly. So I think at the moment, what we're trying to do is build out as much information as possible to be presentable to the community so that they can go through a list of cheaters and be like, hey, these look like cheaters, these don't, and give clear criteria as to why they're cheating or how they're cheating, right? And I think once we are able to build out a pipeline like that, which we're very close to doing, currently we do it internally, right? We have people on the team who are looking for cheaters and who are actively participating in that every day. Once we kind of hand that over to the community, what we feel like will happen is stewards of the community will start noticing and isolating incidents of cheating. They'll be able to report that through some kind of, again, decentralized mechanism. So it's not like a witch hunt, but it's more like a cooperative thing. And we're hoping that that will drive down people's incentive to cheat because they know that people in the community are looking out for them and are trying. And it's more like a community ethics type thing than just like a central actor saying, hey, this is bad, you're banned. And I think that like lends itself to better like public behavior as well, right? Like if you know the peers around you are like kind of watching out for it, but are also on your side, you kind of feel more incentivized to be like a good citizen rather than someone who's trying to game the system. So.
Well, I would add. Can you hear me? Fine. I would add to that. I would add to that, like to tie it back to your question about the governance and how you use tokenomics and blockchain and all that. So, in decentralization, we're trying to be very thoughtful about how we decentralize, right? And to your point about kind of centralized right now to move fast, and there's some trade-offs. But like if you look at what we just did with, we announced a bounty program, right? Where we're making the API available, we're sharing the data, we're giving people incentives to go out and find behavior that is not contributing beneficially to the network, which is how we define cheating.
Yep.
And if they find that, they can highlight it, make the case, and we'll put earnings in escrow, and we'll kind of evaluate it. And then if they conclude it's a cheater, or we conclude it's a cheater, we'll make it public, and the community will cover the PCN. So we're finding ways to kind of balance those.
You guys you did that just recently, right? There's a cluster in La Jolla that was like, I don't know, 15 or 17 radios. And myself and a couple other people who did it way before I noticed it, drove by there. They weren't providing any coverage. They're basically like turning their radios on, providing coverage through their own Bumblebee. Then they turn the radio off, turn the next one on. Like, however they were doing their cheating, they were doing it. And what I heard on the last call was like, hey, we're just going to put exactly this. We're going to put their funds in escrow. And then if we determine they are cheating, they're not going to get it back. Those funds get distributed to the community. Like, that seems pretty awesome. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't do that forever, but that seems pretty awesome. When you got a small network, it's easier to do.
Yeah, and we want to find solutions in scale, but the kind of your point of not being fully DAO driven helps us
It's rad.
come up with a cool idea like this, implement it quickly, and then challenge it. As you scale up, there will be points where it's going to be better to be a DAO than not, and then we'll transition.
I'm curious about where those points are. I mean, I've obviously watched Helium grow from 7,000 LoRa stations when I came on to 900,000 today, and it's a different kettle of fish. At 7,000, you can have like a fourth grader go through them one by one and be done in about a week. At 900,000, that's never going to happen. And so you guys are at the very beginning, having seen how Helium built it. How are you looking forward and saying, okay, what can we figure out from those lessons learned, and then apply that to what we're doing? Is there like a set date maybe, or is there a set way you're thinking about that?
Well, on the next step is data credits. And once you do data credits, I think the cheating is going to be much more difficult because it'll have a financial cost to it, and there'll be like a real usage component. And then we'll want to get to the DAO once we have enough traction where the frequency changes are going to be lower to that. So I don't have a metric. I can't say it's going to be,
Give me a date, October 12th.
Yeah, October
You
12th
heard it here.
at 3 p.m. This is when Skynet turns on. It's like, no, that's it. We don't have a date like that. No, it's more, we're waiting, actually, probably for community feedback of like when the community is like, hey, we really want to have the DAOs kick in now, and that's probably the right time to do it.
Okay.
And sorry, go ahead.
I think there's lots happening too, right? Like we're setting up the foundation. We announced the grants program, committee announcement coming soon. I know I said that last week, but it's coming this week, I promise. So there's a lot of that happening in the background. We're getting all the infrastructure ready, and like to Anthony's point, we don't want to put a hard stake in the ground. We want to be able to be reactive and strategic about it.
And I mean, this is really, it goes to kind of what Web3 stuff and the new generations of companies is about. is we do stuff like this where we're sitting around a table kind of talking things out. You guys are explaining it to me, but you're being super open about like, hey, here's the challenge we have. Here's where we're not going to put a date. Here's what we might not get right, and here's how we're trying to attack this problem. But it might not be the right way, and that's a pretty cool thing to see, both in what you guys are doing and what every other project out there is also doing. It's really, I think, encouraging for all the people who are participating in Web3 to see this kind of example where it's like, oh yeah, there's problems. Let's see if we can all fix them together. And there's not like a one black box where it's like, oh yeah, that.
If there was no problems, it would have already been done. So
Yeah.
that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
So.
What do you guys think is the biggest problem? I mean, I get wrapped up in one thing, but what's the biggest problem?
What do you think is a big problem?
Depends what you ask, but I guess my biggest problem is scaling, right? So we want to make sure that as we scale, we provide reliable tools and services for people to use.
Yep.
So they can focus on actually providing coverage and not focusing on growing pains. So that's my biggest.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I would say like the real-time component, I think, is the biggest near-term challenge for us coming up, is like making sure we can make everything real-time, transition that over while still being able to provide all of the network incentive and the payments in the right time and time frame and all of that. So I think that's going to be an infrastructure challenge for us. That's going to be a data challenge for us. But and the scaling aspect only adds to that challenge. So yeah, that'll be very interesting. It's a cool problem to tackle. So we're excited about that.
Are there certain numbers or kind of growth points where you're like, hey, once we get, what do you guys have now, 500 or 600 radios deployed? It's under 1,000 still?
It's over 1,000
Over
radios
1,000.
deployed. We have around like 500 to 600 active radios that earn every day.
Yep, okay. Maybe that's what I'm seeing on the Explorer, and that's explorer.pollenmobile.io, I think.
Yep.
Where do you guys see like, okay, we can handle all this the way we're doing it right now up to X amount, and once we get to that, we're going to have to do something different. Like where do we see the first point?
We honestly
Anthony, like, I
already
don't know
saw
right now.
that. Like
Yeah.
we're already switching from one type of core architecture to another in order to facilitate our scheme and to make it more scalable. So like shifting to greenhouse, I think will be a massive infrastructure improvement across the board for us, because we'll be able to do a lot more cool things with the technology, while also providing more ease of use, while also providing more reporting and more statistics. I think all of that comes from this one upgrade, and not to say this is the final upgrade or anything, but
You guys should be good at this.
There's going to be a lot more upgrades.
yeah,
coming.
there's definitely going to be a lot more
But
upgrades.
It will open up the sales pipeline to have more people join faster.
Okay, so let's talk about what greenhouse is. So the dandelions that I got came as a box with, I think it was called a stem, which is a box that I plug into the router, and then there is a cable that goes from that to the actual radio, and there's some PoE stuff that goes along with that. And that is the current thing, is a stem and then a flower. And then this greenhouse thing is removing the stem.
Correct.
And tell me how it's putting all the stuff on the flower. I don't understand. How's the magic happening?
I mean, from the software perspective, it's just like usually what happens, the stem was in charge of a lot of the radio or the core functionalities, but basically having it out there, it basically exposes users for bigger errors on their side, right? So we want to abstract that away from them, not let them worry about it, and let us manage it completely, instead of them having to manage a radio and a box. So it's much easier for us just to put it in the cloud per se, and then manage it from there. We can basically more easily reshuffle our resources internally, our infrastructure. So we can basically hey, this region is basically overloaded. Let's switch things around to basically load balance, and we don't have to reach out to the stems and make sure we can do that from our side, and it's basically easier to manage from our side. But then that brings the question of
It's going to be a problem for you at some point when it gets
Yeah, I mean,
huge, though, right?
the easiest way is think about the stem went into the greenhouse, and you're connecting through it through a secure tunnel.
So we are the guardians of the stems now, basically. We have them behind the scenes, managing them for you, because most of the support tickets we got was hey, my stem is not working, what should I do? And it's we want them to focus on the radio, not on the stem.
Should I be more active on support? I just plug things in and walk away, and I trust that you guys are going to make it work. How often are you seeing what's the failure rate on these things? Are you seeing they're going down all the time, or is it no, only 0.02% of them?
It's somewhere in between the two. It's not 0.02%, but we work really hard to make it plug and play, and I feel like you mentioned you had that experience. So if it's working, you don't need email support. Everything is good.
I mean, I generally don't email support. I'm just like, well, it's like warranty voided. Like, let's see what happens.
Yeah, we'll try that. So I would say there's, classes of support tickets, like the Ethernet ports were reversed and they had to be one way. That's like a major headache.
Yep.
You were talking about having the right colors and plugging them in. So that was one issue where the greenhouse piece is going to
Fix that.
fix a lot.
I don't see anything that could possibly go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one is like connectivity issues through being able to have your ISP forward the right packets. That's fairly small.
Hardware quality issues sometimes.
But across the board, you guys weren't seeing like some giant thing. You're like, we need to fix that right away. Like most, it was just. It sounds like these are just like
the right away might be
standard.
the real time. Probably the biggest concern, the biggest support tickets we get is like, it's 5 p.m. I didn't get my rewards yet.
Yeah, where's my money? Yeah.
And so that's what the biggest thing that we
But I
want to
think
provide
the
clarity to.
biggest incentive was reducing the prices of entry point to the
That's true.
network, right? So
Right.
we shave off like $600 or more.
$1,000.
$1,000
On
just
the
because
bill.
managing the stem and all the resources it takes.
Yep.
You can basically.
That's right. So the new dandelions, what were the old ones? They were 1,500 or more.
1,800.
1,800.
And then we went to what, 7?
Finance guy coming in hard.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yeah,
That's
we-
a question.
He's the money guy, exactly.
because it was the 4th, we priced it at $776.
It's America right there. Yeah.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom from stems.
That's, that's somebody's question. What's our total cost to deploy a small indoor setup, and how do we get compensated for helping Pollen's network expand?
It's like you don't get questions like that or like more bump set.
Yeah, right.
Whoever wrote that, who's sitting on the other side of the wall, great job.
Yeah.
So the dandelion is our most affordable entry level flower. It's the Bicells 227. We did the promo 776. The retail price going forward is going to be something close to that. So that's really your all-in costs that can support. We can get a couple blocks of coverage, line of sight here in San Francisco with that. You can use it indoors. You can use it outdoors. It's designed for outdoor use. So we've got the hex limits on that right now at 5. So you can have that radio validated in 5 different hexes each day.
Yeah.
And then what that translates into PCN, that'll be 50 picks, the incentive credits. That gets calculated into PCN at the end of the day based on how many credits were earned system-wide. So,
Also based on how many users attached.
and how many bumblebees
Yeah.
validated, how many honeybees attached.
I probably should have walked there at the first.
That's okay.
Because I get so excited. So when we think about this, is that you've got a bumblebee. It's going around validating coverage. As it validates more coverage, it earns more, ultimately PCN, which is the token that you guys are using. And then any given flower or radio can earn off of up to X number of Res 9 hexes. So for folks watching Helium, you guys are using Res 9s, not Res 8s. And for the dandelion, it used to be 7 hexes, now it's down to 5. So even if a bumblebee goes to 30 hexes and that radio covers all 30 hexes and reports back like, yep, I'm getting good signal, you only get rewarded for 5 of them.
It's unlikely to be like that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you have, you're pointing at the sky and you're flying a bumblebee around and you're seeing it. There's the Res 9 hex is pretty large though.
It's still pretty big because it's 400 meters across,
Yes,
something like that?
it's like almost half a kilometer across. So it should cover around like 2 or 3 city blocks, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we really set those, to Anthony's point about once we moved to paid data, there's really no way to game the system, right? Because if you're gaming it, there's friction costs and you're just costing yourself money. So it's like,
Someone's going to figure it out.
Sure.
We'll be
I
curious.
don't want to make a
it will be impossible.
Like, now there's going to be
Impossible, never going to happen.
Yeah.
So let me retract that, revise my remarks. But we're trying to replicate what the radios will earn once we start paying, once data is paid for it, right? So we want them in the best,
Okay.
the highest locations,
Yep.
the most coverage, the densest places, the places where there isn't coverage today. So we're trying to tune the hexes and the other economics to kind of reflect that, so that when we do turn on data, we've got the best possible network possible.
And also maybe that people won't be super surprised.
Correct.
Is that also in line with that?
What do you mean by that?
So let's say I've got mine up right now and it's earning off of 5 a day because I'm driving my little route, is once you guys go over to, once you turn on data credits, I should expect to generally earn the same the day after they're turned on as I did the day before.
Correct.
In
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, correct.
Close enough. It's not going to be like, oh my God, I was earning 10,000 of them and now I'm earning 4.
But then there's also the component that you should be able to use data from those hexes, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we want to
That's
also
the key
do
thing,
that
yeah.
too, right? You can validate a hex 30 away from yours, but it doesn't make sense because you cannot use data there reliably. So we also want to curve expectations when we actually turn on the network, actual data usage.
Okay.
That's your PCN.
I got so many questions about radio. So
And then
what do you
your
got?
mic needs to go up. Up by, yeah.
Or I can just, there's a little dial where he is, the third one over, turn it
Yeah,
up.
but it's so low.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, where do I start? The radio that I've got up is facing north. It is mapping hexes, 3 Res 9 hexes south of it, reliably. So it's facing one way. If I look at the radiation pattern, it should only get stuff north. It gets more stuff to the south of it, and I've driven everything reasonable around it. I'm thinking that at this point, like the radios are not that, the radiation patterns are not that reliable. But I'm an idiot, so
I mean, there's many things. So radio propagation is basically black magic.
yeah.
And so the best way to do it is to, I mean, there's all kinds of tools that will do this, but ultimately you want to just measure the connectivity and the coverage you have to know what's happening here.
Yep.
It could be bouncing off of buildings. It sounds like you have a pretty nice installation if you can see 3 back and maybe more forward. And so I would definitely, I mean, you have a great setup. It's not, you know, the manufacturer has a radiation pattern, and you can see it, and you'll see that it's.
It should be, but it's
mostly
happening on
forward.
both of mine, which is both of them. So both of them are on poles on top of buildings, right? And they're like way up in the air. And on both of them, I can see. Let's see, is it as much behind it as I can in front of it? Maybe it's not quite as much behind on one of them, but it just made me think like.
But
Man,
usually it's not like a perfect. You just beam frequency forward.
Right.
You also get back.
Yeah,
propagation.
you'll get back
So
lobes and
if
side
you look
lobes.
at the shape, it has a little bit going backwards too.
Yeah.
So you have height plus a little bit of back radiation.
Yeah.
You get to cover a little bit more behind too.
yeah, no, it's really made me think about like what are these things doing? What are they covering? Because it's clearly covering directly beneath it, which I wouldn't have thought it would do, and then behind it as well, and then in front of it.
Somebody asked, is he talking about buy cells here? Do you know what that is?
Mhm.
That's
I
one of the
believe it.
manufacturers that we support. Yeah.
So you have the dandelion, right? So it's the BICELs 2 to 7.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, and I think this goes to a couple things. Number one, my feeling is that both you guys and Helium and whoever enters this space with these mappers is going to have an enormous and an enormously valuable data set for cell tower operators as far as like this is exactly where our coverage is. Because of the mapping units that you guys are deploying, there was a bumblebee around here somewhere, but they're, what about this big? Is it back here? Yeah, a little black one. Yep, just blinking away.
Bring it up here.
Is that something that you guys look at as part of your business plan? Is to say like, yeah, we're going to sell where we're covering, or we're going to sell this information maybe about a radio. Like if you see across the network that every 227 that gets deployed has a different actual radiation coverage than the pattern. Are you guys thinking about that, or is that like
No,
not
they
like-
definitely have. They're all unique.
Okay.
So they may all be the same when they leave the factory, but based on the placement of where they are, height is the number one that matters. Second would be like occlusion
Okay.
in front of
An
it.
occlusion is just blocking it, like a
Yeah,
building.
yeah, or like there's a tree somewhere, or maybe there's a house and it'll like reflect off of that and go this way, not that way. Or does diffraction and I'll see behind the building but not in front. There's all this black magic. So the only way to do it is to really check to see does it work here or not. Obviously we're checking Pollen, but we're also checking other networks because we'd like to be able to show, ultimately we want to be able to know we're creating coverage where there's the biggest demand, meaning cities and places where there's demand. We're creating also coverage where there's no alternative.
Right.
So this is kind of the origin story for this. Is like
Yep.
at the mines and my house and a bunch of places in the Bay Area. The big MNOs still have difficulty, cover. I mean, they could do it if they want to. It's just cost benefit for them.
Yep.
And for me, the cost benefit is great. I want to set it up and I want to cover my neighborhood. So we want to be able to soon show a map of the coverage so people can predict not just like where pollen coverage is, but also where do the MNOs have holes and could have gaps and fill it in. And that's kind of a sweet spot for
Yeah,
both
I
of
love it. What do you got?
Will the MNOs roam onto Pollen?
I mean, that's not our main. I mean, it's kind of the main difference between kind of what we understand helium to be doing,
Yep.
and what we want to do. Obviously, we're open to doing this, and we're talking to all the MNOs, and we're working with them. The objective is that where Pollen has better service than the MNOs, of course, we'll make the coverage available for them, and ideally we can reciprocate, and they can give coverage where they have better than we do.
That'd be cool, yeah.
So we,
Which is how it works with all of them right now.
that's how it works anyway, right? So I mean, telecom is a co-opetition business, and
Oh, that's cool.
so everybody competes, but also collaborates because it's really difficult to build these networks. And to that extent, I don't know if Pollen's gonna be successful, right? Like this is a great experiment, and we'll see where it is. And we're working super hard to make it happen, but it's got a lot of challenges ahead that we're trying to overcome.
We have announced, we have signed our first data offload agreement. I'm not saying who it's with yet, but that is part of our business model. It's something that's happening, and as soon as we've got the technical integration, we'll be announcing more details about that.
So if we, in that vein, if we fast forward 2 or maybe 5 years and everything has gone like your wildest dreams came true, what does it look like for Pollen in, let's say, 2025? Where it's like you crushed it and you're like, oh my God, I never thought that could happen. What happens?
Well, I mean, you mean what does it look like, or what do we do next?
What does it look like? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean, so to me, we want to have like 40 megabits level speed everywhere. And so there's a lot of talk about we need 5G, but like nobody really wants 5G. They want faster speeds. They don't care how the phone really talks. And when you have good 4G, you're very happy. And when you have bad 5G, you're not happy. When you have good 5G, you're still happy too because it's working. So
you don't care. You want the thing to
that's
work.
my point. So to me, the technology mean doesn't really matter. There's a couple idiosyncrasies there that do matter. Low latency. If you want to have sub 3 millisecond ping time, you want to. If you're a spectrum owner, you can aggregate all the spectrum together to go fire faster pipe, but that's not as critical. So we want to have global 40 megabits everywhere to everyone and everything. So we think like all the cars, all your devices, like laptops should have Pollen baked in. You should have Wi-Fi, but you should also have Pollen. You should be able to use Pollen to get on everybody's Wi-Fi and compensate them for that too. So, we really see, Pollen as a bridge between, internet physical bandwidth and like roaming consumers of that bandwidth.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting,
So,
yeah.
but there's a lot of scaling to do between now and then, but that's kind of that's the different
hops,
that's the
skipping a
direction where we're going. So yeah.
I think an important thing to take away from that is there's a lot of potential this technology unlocks, and that this tokenomic, this crypto technology and economic model enables us to do with such a foundational, critical technology that powers the world in so many ways, that we have a lot of big, awesome ideas, and we're working towards a lot of things, but we're also discovering new applications as we go in conjunction with the community and our customers and people reaching out and wanting to do things. So like there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of applications that we didn't necessarily foresee as being like the most immediate, most interesting things that are kind of percolating. So I think you're going to see a lot of interesting things come out of Pollen beyond just getting nodes out there and charging for data.
For sure. I mean, it unlocks the ability for an Uber driver who's maybe just driving Uber and scraping, just say like, hey, I'll chuck a mapper on my car and level up their game, and then you figure out kind of where you go from there. Maybe are you guys thinking about putting other stuff in this mapper, or will it always only be the mapper that you've got?
Yeah, so we see the Bumblebee evolving with better GPS, better other devices in there. We're not interested in like collecting imagery or anything like that. We're purely for optimizing the network, but there's other frequencies and bands that we want to support there. We also want to do a subset of that on the phone. So on the Honeybee, which is basically your phone version of the Bumblebee, we have this whole flower and insect
Oh
thing
yeah,
on this.
I go back and forth between calling it a radio and a flower or whatever it is. But yeah.
You'll be calling them only flowers soon, so that's good. And so the objective there is that we want to be able to have everybody's phones do this, right? So the best way to catch, and prevent cheating is to have the natural background data and validation happening. Be able to identify like, hey, only 4 people see this one guy, and everybody else does it. In your San Diego, example, it was only them they was doing it, and there wasn't a ton of other validators. If there was another ton of validators, that would stand straight out, be like, look, it's only these people that always see each other, and none of these other guys ever see them, but these guys see everybody else, and so they're probably the ones that are cheating. So, yeah.
And you guys are coming out with an upgraded version of this, the Killer Bee. Is that the?
Yeah. So the Killer Bee is a little bit different. So, so in terms of trying to be able to ensure the quality of the data that we're putting out, because we think that's a key metric that we can improve on, and that means So we're building, there's a more expensive, more fancy version that has a GPS that will do RTK, so you can get centimeter level positioning to really know like where's the actual.
And RTK is real-time kinematic, I think?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Basically connects to a base station and gives you a good, better GPS signals for you to be able to get a position. It has different radios. The radios report back in real time,
Yep.
and different antennas. And so the idea that, and then you'll be staking some PCN. So basically, right now you're validating, but there's no, if you cheat, there's no consequence to that. For the Killer Bee, which is going to be effectively like a community version of a police version of this, they're there. We think that they're going to earn the same as a Bumblebee, but they'll be able to like reliably say, like we're trusting their reports more than the Bumblebee reports, because they have downside where there's a bounty on them of how much they've staked to be able to correctly honest.
Yeah, because the crooks are immediately going to buy them and figure it out. So it's like, all right, how do we make this painful to get
Correct.
around?
Yeah.
What do you got, Lee?
When will the private BB drop be?
We're thinking it's going to be next week now.
Okay.
So I don't want to.
That seems like a common answer for like across cryptos, like next week. Next week.
But for real.
Also a common answer. Yeah.
You saw the factory downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're stocking up on them. So
That was pretty cool. It was seeing this, and that's one thing you guys are definitely doing very differently than Helium, is keeping everything right now at least in-house. And maybe that is what Helium did in the beginning, and you guys are maybe seeing the same problem. Is like you can't make 300,000 radios downstairs. I don't think you can. I'm sure.
Yeah,
someone can.
and I mean we could, but we don't want to. Right? The whole point here is helping other people being able to build the hardware and do that. So that's the objective. Yeah.
I mean, we announced last week. Moso is a new partner.
Yep.
We're going to be announcing a drop with them soon. So there's other partners in the pipeline. Shree's earlier point about our biggest challenge to date has always been scale. Right, like keeping up with demands has been our challenge, making sure everything works and meeting customer expectations. So we've been spending a lot of time on that infrastructure and making the pipe bigger in terms of supply and making it more reliable. So Moso's part of that. CalChip's been great. BioCells has been great. We've got others coming. So yes, there will be others helping us.
No, it's super cool to see and see like, okay, here, I think we're all, maybe it's just me, but I think most of us are learning like these stages of a blockchain project's growth, where you can kind of do everything internal at first, just like any other business, and then at some point you get so big, you get to scale, and you're like, we can't do it all ourselves. And as long as you're thinking ahead about that and what it's going to do. Pretty exciting. What do you got?
For you to consider Pollen to be a success, meet the long-term goals you just described, how many radio deployments are needed?
That's a good question.
We estimated, I think, like 10 million for the U.S. to get kind of national coverage.
Yep.
That's like a fairly fuzzy number, but there was some pretty good math and calculus behind
Yeah,
it.
we spent a lot of time thinking, but there's an important caveat and that's at the current level of technology, current CBRS, power limits, et cetera, et cetera. So, is that all going to remain static forever? Probably not. There's a lot of influential people out there pushing for higher power limits in CBRS, et cetera. So,
Well, that's also like fully national coverage,
Yeah.
at better than the existing MNO connectivity. So that's a very high bar. That's not the high bar of where the network actually works, right? So right now we're focused on getting full coverage in San Francisco. So at any block you can turn on your phone and you can use Pollen exclusively there. And we're choosing San Francisco because we need a small, geographical coverage to show that the network can actually work and build that. So, and that's in the several thousand.
And Houston's going to give you guys a run for your money.
Great, and
Apparently
I love it. That's great. That's
they're
awesome.
starting to really pick up
Yeah.
coverage. San Diego, we're just like, we're a little bit slower.
You're more relaxed,
We'll get to it.
Do
We'll
a
get to
little
it. There's
little
other
surfing in
stuff.
the morning, and then maybe we'll do it a little
Yeah.
after. So.
I say everything's bigger in Texas, but it looks like San Francisco's deployments are bigger than both Houston.
Oh, I
and
hear
Dallas combined, so,
I hear a competition
I
coming.
don't know. It's weird.
Yeah.
And it's good to see you guys also opening up channels on Pollen to say like, hey, here's how to start working together. Is that something that you're looking at as far as putting the data together to incentivize people to work together versus what certainly I've seen on Helium, where there just was never that connection between people to say like, hey, I'm putting this thing up, like let's figure out a way for everybody to work. And that kind of happened ad hoc. Are you guys baking that in, or is that still something where you're just like, let them figure it out?
Absolutely. We're still planning on this, but we haven't finalized anything, but we really want to incentivize coverage over a continuum. And so the idea being as you have coverage in spots, and as you like travel from place to place, the more connected you can stay, the more incentive you have to like earn more. And we haven't come up with an algorithm for that, but our community members really suggested this kind of a improvement. So we're kind of thinking it through, but the idea being that you're not just incentivized for your little pocket of coverage,
Yep.
you're incentivized for connecting with someone else and being able to transition to someone else, so that the end user has a really seamless experience of like, you know, driving on the highway and just getting pollen. And so I think that is a really big opportunity for collaboration, cooperation, because not only are you optimizing for just your, your cell site, you're starting now having to, communicate with your neighbors, communicate with your peers, and really build out a seamless network. And I think that'll be a huge game changer for us when we introduce that. And we don't really have a set date on that either, but that's definitely a near-term improvement that we're thinking about.
Did you cover, somebody asked, how does Pollen plan to account for those who spoof and game the system? You guys covered that one, right?
Yeah, roughly.
Good?
So,
Okay.
we have basically the escrow system. I'll just explain it very briefly, but the idea being that if you are put on a list for being suspected of cheating, then your payments go to escrow, and upon investigation of that escrow payments or of that escrow situation, you'll either receive your payments back if you're deemed not cheating, or all of the sum that you would have earned will go to the community if you're deemed to be cheating. And we haven't introduced a blacklist yet. We're calling this the gray list because you're getting escrowed. But the idea will be that if you are found to be cheating, your device might be blacklisted, and you might be prevented from getting any rewards for that device unless you prove that it's changed hands or exchanged.
So someone will put that on eBay, they'll sell their blacklist.
Right. So, and we plan on publicizing all of those lists as well. So we have that available for people to see and know, this device is on a blacklist. Like, don't
that's
buy
an
that
interesting
one.
thing, is making that really clear. Because one thing that I've seen on the Helium side is people have questions like, hey, I'm buying this thing on eBay, how do I know it's good? Is there is an okay way to do it, but there's not like a push button easy way to do it. And you guys are starting to think like, if I'm just spitballing on that thing, it's like, okay, there's this box and it's got these numbers on it, and I can type in, this is unit B7942, like, oh, that's a blacklist?
And
not buying that.
it doesn't even have to be weird numbers, right? We have this awesome wacky name that goes with every device. So it'll be easy to remember, and you can just type it in and search for your name, and hopefully it'll tell you you're off the blacklist.
And you guys dropped erect into that name. Is that going to get removed, or is that staying in there?
We definitely have a list of words that will be removed in the future.
We removed a bunch. We just didn't catch that one.
Yeah.
It was a funny one. Another thing that I saw happen right away was people started talking about driving routes. Right, so everybody learned from Helium. They're applying that same learning to Pollen. It's like, okay, I'm going to get big fast. I'm going to deploy all these things. Like, we all know that if you get into a project early, that's where, on the gain side for tokens, that's where they are. Like, it'll never happen in 10 years. It'll happen in the first 6 months to a year. So I saw the routes going out right away.
I think it's slightly different. That's when you are playing only for the rewards. I think you need to play for the data credits, right? So we expect that there's going to be more to be made on the long-term side because of the data than there is on the early side.
I like that.
And that's important. Otherwise, I mean, that's the key thing that we're pushing for, right? And so my biggest concern is like, how do we get as many users as possible to be able to get that? So that's a key thing. I mean, if you were never going to have traffic that was going to pay for itself, then it's not worth doing. And so we think that it is, but that's
I like that. That's where you guys are thinking of it. I think it's going to be super hard for, I think you guys went online February 2022, something like that. It's going to be pretty darn difficult for anyone who's coming online now to ever earn what they were earning February to March.
No, that's fair. That's fair. No. I'm not saying on the number of tokens you won't match that, but on a ROI, right? So in terms of like, if you have a node in a great spot and there's a lot of users, you could be earning more in terms of dollars for the traffic piece than you are for the incentives.
And I mean, for me, in general, like, it's just best to be super straight about stuff and to come in and say like, well, I'm just going to try and see what these guys want to have done and then do that if it lines up with what I want. And in this case, it's like, okay, provide great coverage. Cool, that's fun to do. I put antennas up high, like I'll run do the best I can to do the best deployment possible and not worry about the gaming side. But I did see, so going back to a little bit of that, I see immediately routes start up. And it makes sense. If you're looking at a map, you're like, okay, I got to drive this thing every day. What's the most efficient route to drive So first question is, are you guys going to publish anything where it's like, show me your local area and I'll show you the most efficient route to collect the most pollen?
I think we want the community to do that, honestly.
Okay.
It's kind of already happening.
A little bit with
People
Pollen Vision,
people are
right?
trading maps like in Discord. And,
Yep.
Um,
Is that going to be something, but that's not going to be something built into Pollen. That's something where you guys like, hey, we got enough shit going on.
I would venture to say we're probably going to provide more data streams for them to do it themselves.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's like the API stuff that's
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Someone gave me access to that, and I want to tell them like, I actually don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to pass it on to someone who does. And I cleared that with whoever I was talking with. And they're like, okay, that sounds good. There's a funny thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
I mean, ultimately, we want the pollen route to be whatever you drive in your normal day, right? Because you got to have coverage there. And so right now, it's not popping up along that route. So maybe you do a little detour or maybe a long detour to do whatever you want to do. But ultimately, what we want to make sure is that where you're going is where we build the coverage.
right, and we didn't hit this, is that you've got a cool little mechanism where everywhere this bumblebee goes where there isn't currently coverage,
Yep.
it drops what you guys call pollen.
Yep.
And then that pollen builds up over time.
Yep.
So I've been driving out to my little place where I fly a paraglider. There's no coverage out there.
Correct.
If eventually I can convince my buddy to put a dandelion up there, he's going to collect all of that pollen that I've been
Exactly.
dropping
Yes.
over time.
Correct.
So it should be good for him
Correct.
or her.
Yeah. That's the objective. Is we want to. I mean, because it's very difficult to build network effects. It's even harder to build two-sided network effects, which is what we're building here, or two-sided networks. And so we want to be able to indicate where the higher demand is going to be, and
Yep.
not do that by tweaking it ourselves, which we can do through kind of changing the hex multipliers. But we wanted to do that organic based on like where people are going and what they're doing. So you can see through the where's the pollen been dropped, like the airport's going to be an important spot. There's a bunch of places like that it will naturally come up. And so whoever's going to set it up there will be able to
And
collect
those stack up over time. So if there's 30 people driving around the bumblebee and they all go to the airport, there's going to be 30 whatever sets of
Yep.
pollen. on
And that's
those
helpful
tracks.
to know, like, turns out, like, this freeway is much more important than the backside of the canyon. But, if the person wants to get connectivity there, they can still set it up themselves. And so that's the flip side doing that.
It's cool to see it. What do you guys? I'm seeing you like
Bomber.
pointing at stuff over here.
Bomber Crypto 2.0 asks, maybe Nick can ask them about their blockchain and if they are built on Solana, future plan, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are built on Solana right now.
Yep.
PCN is a SPL token, so it's like a derivative token of Solana. As of now, we've had pretty good success with like distributing payments and using it on an everyday basis. We really chose it because it has like the lowest transaction fees that we could find while also being scalable and big enough where people want to use it, and it has a lot of apps and support that are built on top of it already. So yeah, we plan on staying with it and going forward with their scaling as well, and we plan on collaborating with them hopefully and like pushing their blockchain connectivity network as much as we push our Pollen network as well, I think. So yeah, in the future, hopefully they have more. We have more like rapport and feedback with them, and we can like build more features with them. But yeah, as of now, that's kind of where we stand. We did try Ethereum. And it was very difficult.
Sure.
It was very costly as well. But yeah, so those are the main ones we've tried, and we considered other ones as well, like Polygon and Avalanche. But yeah, Solana is what we're on right now.
Okay. All my stuff got wiped out in some scam 4 months ago. So all I've got left is Solana and a couple other things. So that's good that you guys stuck with that. Avalanche wouldn't have made a difference. What do you got? Anything else?
Nope.
There's some Spanish in there. ¿Qué tal? All right. Cool. So the people driving routes. The other thing that I saw right away that is going to happen, and I've been telling, is one of you guys 5G unit? Okay. I've been telling you like, hey,
Depends on what's the question.
first, yeah.
so there's someone on Discord I've been telling like, hey, here's what I'm doing, because I immediately took the Bumblebee apart. Like, okay, it's got a UFL connector. Cool. I'm going to pop that off. I'm going to put on an external antenna. I'll put it up on the car. I've been sending pictures like, here's my little pole with the car. Like, that seems to me to be one of the perverse incentives that's going to happen, right? You're going to get someone, and for me, it's like fun, and I'm telling you or whoever it is, like, this is what I'm doing and when I'm doing it.
It's fine. Yeah.
Like, see if you can find it so that you can stop other people who are not going to tell you about it. How are you guys thinking about managing that kind of thing?
This is also where the density really helps. Because as you get more,
Yep,
you'll
okay.
have other bumblebees coming here and they can't see it, but you can see it.
Yep,
It starts to look suspicious, and so then we imagine over time the weight that we attribute to your validation will
Yep.
go down because you're able to do things that others aren't.
Got
And
it,
so,
okay.
we were trying to think of a way to have self-grading of all the
Oh,
bumblebees.
that's pretty cool. So
Think
over
of
time,
like
like the score would go down.
Yeah,
where it's
think of like
oh,
a ELO chess score, right? And so like everybody's ranked, but basically like every chess player plays each other,
Yep.
and based on who beat who, you can get a number of
Yep.
like how more likely you are to beat somebody else.
Yep.
And so you could think of like how accurate an individual. This is for pairwise people, so it doesn't work as a group, but
Yep.
how.
But it makes sense. If I'm always driving around with like a 12-foot pole and a 6 dBi antenna, it's like that guy sees it everywhere. It's not actually there because 30 other people are driving around
Correct.
with nothing.
Correct.
Are you going to put in, I guess it doesn't matter for cell phones because you're not going to get people to upgrade their cell antennas. One of the things I saw in route delivery is people were already talking about modifying like their delivery van and putting an antenna just on top of it.
Sure.
So I guess the same kind of thing applies. But it also seems like that's a pretty cool incentive to get people to do a little bit of external antenna mapping because in my view as an amateur, is you get more data, and as long as you can discount it kind of correctly and say, well, this is from a 6 dBi, or this is from a 9 dBi, or this is from a multipolarized, and this is from a horizontally polarized, like you're getting more data that you can then feed in and make it more accurate. Is there, how do you guys think
Especially
about
if you also are at the same time are validating the other MNO networks, and then you'll
Yep.
know, oh, you see Pollen, but you're also seeing a tower that nobody else from Verizon sees, or
Yep.
a tower that's from T-Mobile that nobody else sees, or et cetera, from AT&T. And so it's really the combination of all the signals that matters. And we also think, Bumblebee is one, Kilobee is like this, those are like the super high ones. We think that having everybody on their eSIMs, being able to validate that way is a great way to go. So we want to, over time, make it where the vast majority of the validation is coming from the phone, and some Bumblebees coming in there because you can do other things you can on the phones, but that's the like what you're thinking, the way of combining all the data in a smart way. You're able to pull out the signal and discount the noise that you're seeing from other people. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my perfect world, I'll be driving around like the government signals van. I just like radio stuff so much, where it's like catching everything all around and then sending that back. Just it's fun to figure out
Do you
what's
still
going
have
on.
the wooden stand in the back of your truck?
I've upgraded that to a PVC pipe, so it's actually higher and a little cleaner. People are looking at that like, what is that guy
So you
doing?
move from the wood age to the PVC age.
Yeah,
Eventually you get the metals.
I'll get some metal. Yeah, I was going to weld something up.
I think
put
the
it all
PVC
together,
age is
but
after the metal age.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
maybe I skipped.
But I guess in his world.
In his world, yeah, sure.
Yeah, a step at a time. Metal is a little more difficult to work with than just like some old pipe I had
Yeah.
hanging around. On the mining side, there's some pretty cool multipolarized antennas coming out that I'll be testing. I'll be happy to share with you guys. Are you guys looking at anything in the Bumblebee where you're like, oh, we're going to check out different ways to level up that ability to assess areas? Or does that just not make sense at all?
What do you mean by that? I'm not quite
So
following.
the antenna in this is just like, I forget what they call it, but it's like some little strip.
It's a PCB patch antenna.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's basically like this is intended to get similar but slightly better coverage than your phone would, so you can get a little bit of a range and you can discount from that.
Yep.
But ultimately, what we want is, everybody's got one in their pockets here.
Sure.
Those are the ones.
That's what you're servicing.
That's what we're going after, right?
Yep.
So we're super focused on it. We're not focused on IoT. We want everybody to be able to connect to Pollen and have their cell phones work better than they've ever worked before. So that's where we're at.
Okay. I think that's probably a reasonable place to start wrapping it up. Is there anything that you guys wanted to hit that you think the average user might need to know or might be super interested by, that just because you guys are kind of the geeky side of it, that that you're like, oh yeah, every time I talk to my neighbor, they're like, damn, I didn't think about that.
Well, you should know that our flowers are super low power compared to the cell phone towers from the.
Okay.
So they're usually, think of it like as a 40 watt plus, and these are like 1 watt minus. So they might look big, but they're actually not radiating as much. And
Right.
so, that helps us put more density of them.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the world is kind of into these little bubbles where your bandwidth needs to go somewhere. So if you have one tower that's covering half the city is sharing whatever pipe is on that.
Yep.
If there's 100 flowers that are covering that same area, you're getting 100x the pipe potential there.
That's kind of cool to think about it that
So
way, yeah.
that's an interesting thing that people, it
It's like
takes time to
distributing
get.
internet access.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what
yeah.
I think that is, yeah. What about the data science? Like that seems like the coolest thing that I don't think I'll ever understand is like the geeky math shit. Like what are you seeing in there where you're like, oh my God, there's these numbers or this data coming through that I didn't expect?
Well, I think the anti-gaming is huge, right? So I think there's a ton of analysis that we could do to better identify gaming and to run through a bunch of different maybe like machine learning algorithms or different types of outlier detection algorithms. So I foresee that being a big focus area for us, is like building that out, building that pipeline out, and making it more and more robust to the different types of gaming that we're bound to see in the future.
Yeah.
And I also think that again, the community has been very active in like wanting, like being vocal, wanting for more data and like specific types of data streams. And so I think providing them with that and seeing the types of tools that bloom out of that, I think is going to be really rewarding for the community and for us, because we as a team definitely want to build really high quality tools, but I don't think we can build the types of tools that the community wants for their activities. Like we can build tools that will help Pollen grow and deploy, but we can't really build the mapping tools or like the route tools. I think the community is much more poised to build those kinds of tools, and enabling them and giving them the opportunity to do that, I think just enhances the number of people who are contributing to our like project. So I think that's a really cool concept, and I think we want to push that as much as possible to have the community involved as much as possible.
Yeah, are you guys, I'm going to get to you, Oscar, for sure. I got questions. Are you guys thinking about how people get compensated for being involved in the community? Because one thing I saw early on is that folks are really excited because it's a new project, whether it's about weather or radio or birds or whatever. And then at some point they're like, man, I'm on this thing, I'm on Discord, 8 hours a day, nothing's coming back. Like maybe I get to help out a little bit more is like the only reward I get. Is how are you thinking about saying, okay, we got these people who are fired up. Let's make sure that we keep them fired up and keep them kind of contributing to a really healthy community long term. Is that something you're building into it, or is it still like, we're just not there yet?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think there's parts of that happening organically. I think there's organizations or companies forming within the community groups, and they're realizing that they can monetize and incentivize themselves and like their peers in order to get to a bigger, more value for them, right? So like that's like people who are doing the host situation, right, where they get all this hardware and then are renting out the hardware or renting out the spaces to put up that hardware, right? So we're seeing this kind of organic economic growth just by the technology being available, right? And I think that will definitely continue. And in terms of involvement in our community or in our OPCO community, I think we will definitely need to incentivize people to keep contributing. And I think part of that is hiring, right? Like we really do want stellar engineers who are in the community who are interested in this project to come on and like start building with us, right? And like we will hire you full time, so guys keep applying. So yeah, I think that's another big part of it is bringing people on with these expertise and with these interests and passions, bringing them on and getting them involved. I think it's key, and we're still working on like better and better methods to do that. So
and to add to that, I mean, we're very much moving in that direction, right? Like the grants committee, we want that to be community driven. We're talking to a bunch of folks in the community who are very active, finding ways to get them more engaged. But it also gets to the heart of kind of our enhanced DAO structure, right? Like long term, we don't want it to be Pollen OpCo controlling everything. I don't think the community wants that. That's why people are doing this. We also don't want it everything just to be up to everything's a popular vote, right? That doesn't always work. There's something in between, and like finding that middle ground where we bring community members in and have them take on, what in traditional organizations would be more like a management role. Like that's part of the vision, and finding a way to build in economics to make sure they're compensated for it. That's part of the vision. So like big picture, yes, we're absolutely moving towards that. It's slowly, there's just little bits of it that are public right now, but longer term, like we think that's the way to build a successful enhanced DAO is to find a way to engage people, compensate them, and have them take a more active role.
Dig it. Yeah, super. I mean, it's such an exciting time to be alive, no matter who you are, whether you're an engineer or if you're an economist or a teacher or like anyone. Like this is the coolest time to be alive, pretty much, except for maybe the 1940s, which was awesome because people were jumping in other countries and having a giant war that they all had fun in, and came back super healthy. Let's see. Oscar, before I get too off track there. On that happy note,
Where you're going with that one?
What's going on with the radio side? Like when you see what you're doing in Pollen, there's parts of it where like, okay, we got to scale. Are there things where you're discovering new pieces in the network and we're like, oh, I hadn't thought of it in this way before, and there's actually going to be some kind of innovation in this space?
So learning through the process, I learned how traditional telecoms work.
Yep.
And everything you see installed on roofs is someone goes and manually configure with a laptop and puts all the parameters in.
Yep.
So what I like about what we're building is that everything we build is configurable from the cloud. So basically we're building a dynamic network that can be reconfigurable any moment. And that's what telecoms don't have now. So like if you decide to move your antenna from your house to your studio or whatever, then we will take that care of that in the back end and make sure that your antenna can hop your connection between the next and the next. So it's like a very dynamic network. So that's what I'm most excited about. People don't think as networks as static.
Yeah.
Ours is going to be super dynamic.
Yeah.
From the phone side and from the radio side too.
Oh, that's rad. That's cool. So then I'll finish up with you, Anthony, is that from there, we as this kind of decentralized wireless community are building as fast as we can toward like a giant telco kind of thing. How fast do you think that the telcos are coming towards us and saying, like, oh, what you're doing is interesting? I remember I had a conversation with Crown Castle. I'm like, this way of doing it is going to gut you guys. And they're just like, you are an idiot. And more or less, they didn't hang up on me, but they stopped listening. And maybe I was a little bit aggressive there. But do you see, because you guys have got investment from Dish, right? Which is not a small operator. And Charlie Ergen is not by a long shot a dumb dude. That's a sharp cat.
It's a very
do you
smart
see
guy.
them coming super hard, kind of this way of blockchain distributed tokenization stuff, or no?
I think the telecoms are very smart operators. They work well and they've been in business for a long time. They have a huge legacy component to them, right? So even things like CDRs, call data records, of how if you're one carrier, another carrier, how do they exchange data by some? My user was in your network and you owe us money, vice versa. The original, the genesis for that was paper records that people would take down when they were patching you, physically on a network, and they would write them by hand, and then they would type them up, and then they were automatically printed, but they're like printed records. It's like a PDF that you're sending to do this. There's no API, and you're having a direct connection for this. So there's just tons of legacy, and the whole stack of telecom is based on interoperability, backwards compatible interoperability, which means it gets really fat, very quick. And so, I think they see where we're going. I think they like it. They're interested, and everybody we talk to wants to learn, and we want to partner with them on rolling it out. We see ourselves as the world's smallest MNO, we want to cooperate with them, and so we're going to teach them a bunch of stuff, and then we're going to learn a lot from them as well, and get there. I don't think you're going to see MNO, accept crypto as the form of payment for the data that you're going to transfer on their network anytime soon. And so there's a whole bridge of technology that needs to happen to bring them up to speed on interfacing. It's kind of like an impedance match, impedance matching on connecting with them. So.
Yeah, it'd be pretty scary if AT&T comes out like, hey, we're getting into crypto, and they actually roll out a plan. We're like, oh my God, you guys don't understand it?
That'd be great. I mean, I think they understand it. It's just there's just so much machinery that has to change that even if everybody who's like, we have to do this is important, it would take many, many, many years to roll out. So.
Pretty cool place to be for you guys. I'm excited to see what Pollen does and how the whole kind of space grows. Thank you guys a ton for coming on and
thanks for coming out.
Sharing with YouTube. Is there any last questions or people just kind of wrapping it up? Ripping. Okay, I think we'll kill it here. Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Right on. Now I come over here and see if I can actually turn it off. Finish. Lights.